So for today I'm thinking of doing an art critique of a weapon. Uh, just let's see, because yesterday I did art critique of the map payload Cactus Canyon, so let's switch up things a bit. Okay, I think I already have a weapon in mind. I think it's going to be an engineer weapon. Actually, I can look here. What is it going to be? What is it going to be? Probably the weapon that everybody loves and everybody always talks about because it's so special. It's like the greatest weapon of all. Where is it? There you go. The Pomson. Everybody talks about the Pomson. It's that engineering weapon that, people usually pick another one instead. But yeah, let's do an art critique on the Pomson now. So just some heads ups here, disclaimers. I'm gonna need to get into game design to do this art critique, but it's gonna be a limited dive into it. There's a lot that I could say that I'm not gonna be saying for the Pomson and game design. Just a little bit of it, so it's kind of a different idea, right? What I'm going to do here right now. And also I wanted to say that for this art critique I'm following Feldman's method, which is about 4 steps in order. The first I'm gonna do the description, then the analysis, then interpretation, and then judgment. On the description I'm just gonna describe what I see. On the analysis I'm gonna talk about the elements of art. On the interpretation I'm going to interpret the creative vision here behind the Pomson. And on the judgment step I'm going to call this successful or unsuccessful art, thinking on for the artistic vision and comparing that to the principles of art, which is how the elements were used basically. So, that's kind of the idea. We're gonna look at how the creator used the elements of art, compare that to the visual, and see how well they fit together. So, with all that said, without further ado, let's begin! So, first things first, description. What do I see here? Oh, what's this? It is some sort of technological gun, right? With a bunch of stuff in it. It looks like some sort of rifle. You could also mention the name, I guess, the Pomson 6000, which is gonna matter more on the interpretation step, but anyway. Yeah, so it's kind of a rifle, but it's a very high-tech one thing, and it apparently, not sure it shoots bullets, right? Because we could kind of make out this part here could be the cylinder of the gun where the bullets could be, but when we look at the end, what would be the barrel of the Pomson, I don't think there is an exit. It's not hollow, I believe. So yeah, this is not our usual gun. It does not use gunpowder apparently. Oh my god. Okay, what else do I have? Can I describe about the Pomson here? Rifle, apparently futuristic, high tech, and does not use gunpowder and stuff. A lot of details. This guy has a lot of details on its design, right? A lot of protruding parts. Very interesting. And just so many details on the design of it. I guess there is also some sort of gauge here to tell us what the speed of the gun. Well, probably not. Probably temperature or pressure, something like that. There is a number of other gauges here, I guess. It's filled with gauges. Are there gauges or just? I think there are gauges, right? Small ones. Okay, interesting. So this gun has a lot of I don't know, substances, That's true. You gotta keep an eye out, unless the gun explodes or something. Maybe, who knows? Anywhere, anything else for me to describe? Well, at least it has a trigger, much like our guns nowadays. What else? Has this thing here, which is apparently something that could shoot lasers, perhaps, right? But I wouldn't know. I don't know. I think the rest. I think that's a good enough description. By the way, this is not mere perfectionism. The way that I go back to inspect the item whenever I change it where I'm looking. I'm considering the author's presentation here of the item. This little animation that they made for us. Spinning. Anyway. So anything else for me to describe without getting into the analysis? Because we could talk about stuff like its colors, its shapes and stuff, but those are basically the elements of art, so we can leave those to the analysis step. I don't know. I think it is a good enough description. So let's go to the analysis. So the elements of art. Now I'm gonna talk about those for the Pomson. The general consensus, many sources believe there to be 7 elements of art, which are lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color, and the value. Although some designers, authors believe that you can also consider point as an element of art. And that's kind of what I'm going for here. I'm going to consider 8 elements of art. I'm going to add points to it, but don't be surprised if you find 7 elements of art elsewhere. It's the most common theory, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, but I'm still considering most of it. I'm just adding points to it, points, dots. So anyway, let's begin this art critique then. Might as well start with the points and the dots. We don't need to follow any sort of order, by the way, for the elements, but we have to start with something. So for points and dots on this work of art, is there any in the first place? Let's see. I think not. Let's see. Let's look at the Pomson through other angles, possibly. I think for points and dots, I don't see any. Do you? There's stuff like, for example, here. This very small, what appears to be a point dot near the gouge. But I believe this is actually some sort of sublevation, some sort of elevation, some sort of form, let's say. It would relate to the form of the Pomson here. Don't think any points were applied to make it in one way or another. Anything else that could be a point? I think I don't see any. So I guess there are no points here on the Pomson. Alright, so that's fine. Honestly, it's not a problem. What about lines? The elements of lines. Are there lines here on the Pomson? There's a number of stuff here that we could say it's lines, but I believe they can also be actually just forms and shapes. For example, this thing here. This would be what would be the stock of the rifle. Also, here I think it's a easier to see example because it's something more 3D, right? So these are here. I think it's easy to see that's actually the forms. These are actually forms, not lines. something three-dimensional. I'm gonna explain a little bit of each element of the more unusual elements of art, by the way, for those who are not familiar with the terminology. But points are points and lines are lines, okay, so don't worry about that. But in this case, okay, so this part, I think it's more something three-dimensional, so no use of lines there. And what about on this part here, on this part, on this details of the gum? Let's see through different angles. Yeah, okay, so on this part I think again these are just forms. Those are some stuff, three-dimensional stuff, so not exactly lines were used here. And finally on these details of the Pomson, possibly the same idea, let's see. Okay, yeah, in this case I don't think they are necessarily forms, but I just don't think there are actually lines, because the question is, there is another question that I like to ask to help figure that stuff out. If there is a line, how thick that line is. In this case, you can look at the gray thing here as a very thick line, as a thick line, but I don't think that's how I see it. To me, those are mostly their forms or shapes, right? Yeah, I guess that's the part of the art critique where it depends on how you look at things. So I gotta make a choice. And to me, I think this is not like a thick line. I think this is just a thin shape, let's say. And maybe forms, but I think mostly shapes. Okay, no, I actually think there are forms also, because I think there is an effect of light and darkness, which is the element of value, but I think those are forms also, what's being conveyed. Since we're talking about visual art here, what's important is what's being conveyed, because if we change the angle, we can see that it's flat, apparently, right? But when I look at it, if it conveys three-dimensionality, I think that's what we should account for. And to me, that's kind of what it does, with the way it reflects light, for example. So, yeah, to me, those are forms then. So is there any lines? There's some stuff here on the gun, but I believe those would tie better to the element of texture, also here, which is about the nature of surfaces of objects in the artwork, of parts of the artwork. I'm also going to talk about that. So over here also, let me see. I think in general that's it. There's like a lot of stuff that look like lines, but they are, as I see it, they are actually other elements of art here. And no lines were really used to make it. Unless they were used to make it and then they were deleted or something. I don't know. Anyway. I'm thinking, for example, on this part of the gun here. It's because it kind of feels like there is a lighter line, right, between the two surfaces, but I think that's just about forms again and or texture. I don't know, I don't think I can find anything that I would call an actual line here. Which shouldn't be too surprising considering since that's something that I see often, that's the case often for Team Fortress 2 maps and other repos that I have critiqued before. So yeah, but it's always important to look for exceptions, right? But in this case it wasn't it. Oh well. So no points, no lines. Let's talk now about the element of shapes. I mentioned that, right? So shapes is something that you get, for example, if you enclose a space with a line, although you don't need lines to have shapes. They are always two-dimensional. The three basic ones are circles, squares, and triangles. And it's okay if this is something 3D, because it still has shapes. If we look, it's just that there are more depending on the angle we look at. if we look at it through, let me see, through this angle, can I get it? Okay, through this angle, what are the shapes here? So it's kind of a very somewhat of a thin shape with some spikes in the middle, right? It's not something exactly geometrical. It has so that's the idea of shapes. If we switch it around, if we change the angle, then you get the shapes of we see some very iconic shapes of a gun, right? The shapes of a stock of a rifle. Over down there, the shape of you know the name of this, but the shape, there's the trigger stuff. Although the outline is not the only thing that dictates shapes, but it's one thing that helps. For example, in here, if we would pick the outline of everything, it would have a very rough shape, right? But we could also just focus on this cylinder thing, which has what would be a oblong shape. And if we change the angle, can I? Okay, we don't have access to every angle, but yeah. So if an oblong shape is basically, imagine a rectangle but with kind of a circle at the edges. Circle, rectangle, circle. So that's an oblong shape. And this thing here, this part of the gun, so gives out an oblong shape through this angle. But anyway, with all that said, what's my analysis on the shapes here of the Pomson? For the obviously we can't talk about every single shape here because there are too many because of the different angles. But for the most common shapes, the most notable shapes, take into account the presentation also. Because for example, we can't see through every angle, right? Some angles are not part of the presentation, even though we could pick this gun, place it on some sort of... We could use Source FilmMaker, for example, to look at all angles of the gun, but if we're gonna respect the author's presentation... Anyway, you get the picture. So, for the shapes. So, a lot of straightness, let's say. And it doesn't make sense to say straight lines if there are no lines, right? So a lot of straightness on the shapes. I wouldn't call them geometrically necessarily, but I see a lack of smoothness, let's say, of smooth curvatures, let's say. There's some, but even, for example, here on the stock of the gun, it's not a perfect edge, but it's also not perfectly smooth, I believe. Looking closer, it seems like there is a surface, flat surface also, even though that's about 3D, but still. Even here, down here, there is also something like that, I believe. Yeah. What else? So yeah, a lot of these straight shapes. Perhaps on this part here is there some sort of curvature here? Maybe, roughly, right? Those sort of capsules are the greatest source of smooth curvatures for the shapes. There's also this part here on the bottom of it. Okay, actually there's a lot of these capsules, I don't know. So maybe I should take that into account. Although again, they're not that smooth. So yeah. Weird, the protruding parts, capsule things on the barrel of the gun seem to be rougher, straighter than the ones on the other parts. Is it just me? Well, in any case, what else for the shapes? A lot of straightness. Wow. There's a lot of unique shapes here, right? I don't think it's easy to just describe this with a bunch of circles, triangles, rectangles. So there's a lot of unique shapes, and what else? Straightness, unique shapes for the many parts of the gun. and a little bit of geometry depending on the angles. Like over here, this part of the gun is a rectangle. For example, over at there we have like a pentagonal shape on this detail of the gun, right? What else? But other than that, a lot of unique shapes. So yeah, I think that's a good enough analysis on the shapes. A lot of straightness, many unique shapes, and a bit and some more classic geometrical ones. Pentagonal here, rectangular here, and the rest is like pretty unique. And I guess I might as well mention that on some angles we get some shapes that resemble with some semblance of a rifle, right? Especially on the stock of the gun, the trigger, as I said before. You can kinda also roughly compare this to a rifle, because there are many details that change up the shapes of it. But if you look at the broad, let's say, on broader terms, try to look at it as a whole, it kinda is resembles a bit also the shapes of a rifle, right? So anyway, yeah, let's move on to forms. The element of forms is all about three-dimensionality, depth. So for depth, I hide with it, but you know, depth, and all that stuff. So that's the idea. And let's reset for the author's presentation. And so for the forms here, what's my analysis on the forms? Well, as I said before, there are many protruding capsule things, right? So that's notable. Also, a number of flat forms on some spots, namely on the stock of the gun, on the upper part here of the gun, on some parts of the meat of it, let's say, the details of it. So all of that has some flatness, but I don't see that as the most defining feature for forms. For forms, we have some like rough cylindrical forms here on this part, on these parts of the gun, on this part down here, on the capsules, as I said. So what else? Certain flatness, a number of cylindrical forms, and they're not perfect cylinders, right? Because they're still, can still make out they have some edges to them. But anyway, what else? Flatness, cylindrical forms. There we have a number of discs as far as forms goes here, right? We have this set of things on the hexagonal shapes part. We have a number of discs here on this thing, this part, also here. Okay, cool stuff. What else? And some like tubes in here, I guess. I think we have also here some thin tubes for the forms. I wonder if that's enough to describe most things here. So we talked about flatness, cylinders, tubes, discs. Anything else worth mentioning? Funny enough, we have I think shapes that resemble a rifle, but this time the form of the stock is not that resembling of the forms of a rifle, because it's all like flat and straight, right? So I think that's different enough. Although we could argue that it has some resemblance, but I don't know. and the rest is all of these details, as I just said, discs, tubes, cylinders. So I think, and flatness. So I think that's a good enough analysis on the forms here. My bad. So yeah, we could try to be a bit more specific, but with the way I phrased it all, I think it covers most of the gun, of the discs, tubes, cylinders, and flatness. So I guess we don't need to talk about every single thing specifically. I think we kind of covered it already. Okay, so now let's talk about a different element of art. Let's talk about space. Because another way that you could describe forms is how the objects occupy the space around them. And the space is also an element of art. So, for example, there is space here between the stock of the gun and this... what's this? This part here that's also another support part, I guess. Not sure if it is a second stock or if that's even thing. Well, there is some use of space here. Also, naturally, some use of space over here between this upper part of the gun and this other one, gray part. There's some tight use of space on the trigger, right? By nature of how it is. Also something similar here on this down part. Also between the many discs. So between the discs there's usually a tight use of space. Also between in this part here of the gun, what appears to be near the barrel perhaps. Also again, tight use of space around these protrusions here. There is a very, so yeah, right, a lot of tight spaces used all around. And what else as far as the element of space goes? And some more abundance of it, generosity near the stock of the gun, either between these two parts or over here. We could say there is a more generous use of space. So yeah, we could also mention the space between the protrusions that are not at the barrel of the gun, but they are, again, it's mostly tight use of space, right? Perhaps the greatest exception would be these ones, which I think there is some more space between them. I wouldn't necessarily call this a tight space, but yeah, some more use of space there. And if that's said, I think that's it for the use of space. A lot of tightness on the many different details of the gun, and a little more generosity, let's say, on near the stock of it. Alright, now let's talk about the elements of texture. And before I do that, now that I talked about the element of forms and stuff, I hope it's easier to understand where I'm coming from here, or at least how I'm looking at this. And I talked about there being no lines and stuff, right? So I think it's something like a very slight elevation on the stock here. And again, the important part is that that's being conveyed visually, because again, if we look at it through this angle, it's not there weirdly, right? So, but it's fine. It depends on the angle. In this case, since there are many angles where I think it's the forms are conveyed, I think those are more meaningful, let's say. So anyway, at least that's how I see all of this. So we're gonna talk about the element of texture right now, right? So as I said already, it's about the appearances of the surfaces of objects on the artwork. So for example, you can see some very slight differences in color here on the red on this part of the Pomson, also a bit here. And I think to me it looks like some sort of irregularity on the paint of the gun, let's say, something like that. So that's an example of the element of texture. In here, we could also say something similar. We could look at this as a farm, as some sort of scratch, but I think it's not deep enough. I would consider even conveyed. I think to me it's conveyed as something more superficial and so more tied to texture. But again, this is something that you could disagree with me here. Different art critics ought to, possibly. Similar logic here with these details. And what else? I think over here also there is a difference in color that communicates how the surface is a bit different on this small part here under these discs and above the trigger. So, here's a better example maybe. On this part of the stock of the gun, it's all very subtle except of these small scratches, let's say. But I'm gonna be considering these scratches as tied to the element of texture here, not to form. And since that's the case, those are mostly the textures. Oh, yeah, there's also here on the stock of the gun difference in the use in the colors. Again, I think communicates a bit the textures of it. Anywhere else would I see texture? By the way, light being reflected, it's closer. It's more about the element of value. It's not about that lightness and brightness. So that's, even though a lot of the parts of the gun like reflect light strongly, right? I don't think that refers to texture. So anyway, with all that said for texture, that's my analysis. It's kind of hard to make out textures here, right? Depending on what you look at, it's way easier. In here we kind of have to keep squinting on our eyes, trying to find the textures here. So we have found some, even if they kind of demand some interpretation. But with all that said, is this here a more simpler texture? Let's see, over here. Not that much different, right? Again, there is some very subtle difference in the shades of the gray here, and which to me I think could communicate a bit of the texture of the material. But not that much, right? So anyway, yeah, so that ties to basically what I'm thinking on here, which is a very subtle use of texture, very sparse use of texture. We have only found it on specific locations. It was kind of hard to make out the textures there. So yeah, very subtle and sparse use of those. What else? Although there are some still. And I guess the small ones that we found, I would. There's something that I usually say for textures for Team Fortress 2, which is that I see a lot of realism on them usually, conveying well the imperfections of the material or how time wears off something. Could be guns, parts of maps and stuff. And I think I see a little bit of that here for the textures, because there are scratches on the gun, and there's basically the paint seems to be faded on a bit on some parts. On the small textures that I see that once again. So that would basically be what's being communicated with the difference in shades of gray here. Also in shades of red here. So that's how I look at this. That's how I understand all of this. But yeah, but I think more importantly than this small realism still is the fact that they are mostly subtle and sparse to me. So yeah, let's talk about now the element of value, since I mentioned it, right? So value, which is an element all about light and shadow, brightness and shadiness. And for the use of value here, where we can see how light is reflected so well alongside the gun here, right? Why not present the presentation. It's very notable how bright the gun gets depending on the angle of the light reflecting from it. So might as well mention that. Strong brightness for my analysis here on the ISO value. What else? Common and strong brightness, many parts of it. Like look at this angle. Almost half the gun is shining so bright. We can't even make out the details at this specific angle, right? So yeah. And don't get me wrong, there's still some shadows. I believe there's a bit over here, for example. Here under this part of the gun. We just gotta look for them. Over here, maybe. Yeah, under the gun I think this part's a bit darker. So yeah, it's kind of harder to make out the details unless we choose a very specific angle. So yeah, so there is still some darkness to it alongside a very strong brightness. And but it's just hard also to make out the darkness, right? Whenever there are. So yeah, a lot of favoritism for brightness here when it comes to the ISO value. Anything else that I would add to this analysis? I don't know. Obviously, also depends on the angle that you look at it, but still, for the most part, there is like this brightness to me that caught my attention. And yeah, I think that's it. Oftentimes I talk about realism in the ISO value 14422, how they take some time and pay attention to the shapes of the shadows and stuff like that. But in here there is barely any shadows, and the ones that have are kinda hard to notice to me, so I don't think I will be making that commentary. Just favoritism for brightness, as I said before. Anyway, and now I think the only element we're missing is the element of color. And what are the colors used? And well, easy here, right? Everything is either red or gray here. Different shades, often, but still. Okay, I think did I see something black here? Okay, I think these discs are black. Okay, on this part. Okay, so something different. I don't think it's a shadow. I think they're just black. And what else? On the other side also. I think that's it. Everything else, I think it's either gray or red. So yeah. These discs on near the barrel, I think they are gray also. I was thinking, are they black? But I think they are like a darker shade of gray, I believe. Yeah. Oh. Anyway, with that said, so gray and red are the strongest. The strongest colors. We see a lot of red on the stock of the gun, on the barrel of the gun, and we see the gray on many of the details of the gun, on the trigger, for example, also on the disc, on many of the discs, with the exception of the set in the middle, right, which are black discs, but everything else, just that's not a red, is gray here. And also there are many details in gray, even on the stock and the barrel of the gun. So I would say that possibly the gray is more predominant and the red is a bit secondary. Would I say that? No, I don't think so. Even though there is gray, even when there is red, let's say, I do think there is a lot of red also. I guess both colors are equally important here, let's say. And also there's the black discs, let's not forget those. So I think that's it for the elements of art. We talked about points, lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color and value. Yeah, that's all 8 elements there. So now we can go for the interpretation here. what was the artistic vision? What was the creative vision behind the Pomson here? Did the author have any message they wanted to convey? So let's begin with the obvious, right? Considering the context, we're looking at this artwork inside of a game. We can play with this gun in the game. The game is Team Fortress 2, and so I think it was an important part for the artistic vision for this to be a weapon in the game Team Fortress 2. For the engineer class, if you want to add that. So that aspect, that idea is out of the way, right? Because that kind of always is a part of the interpretation when we're doing it for these assets of the game, let's say. So anyway, okay, we have that. What else? Well, I think, as I mentioned in the description, I think technology was also an important idea here. Also, by the way, I mentioned this idea of being a gun for a weapon for the game Team Fortress 2 and stuff, but we could also think a bit of what we talked about on the previous steps when I described this as looking like a rifle and stuff like that, and looking like a gun. So, you know, if this was a different game with different weapons, that could make not that much sense, you know. But being a rifle, as we described it, ties a bit with that. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. So technology, right? Yeah, I believe it was an important part of the creative vision here, for this to convey technology and what else? Perhaps something futuristic. Technology and ideas of technology and future to be conveyed here. We could talk about again what we described, right? A bit of cheating because I literally said, oh, this looks like some sort of technology weapon. But anyway, there being a lot of gouges and perhaps the thing that maybe shoots lasers and the use of metal apparently, right, on the gray parts. All of that we could tie to technological devices. So in this case we're also tying to what I talked about for the analysis, right? The use of gray, flat surfaces I think help depend on, I mentioned flat surfaces on the forums, right? I think there's a number of that, right, on technological devices, machines and stuff, flat surfaces. Not all of them, but still. What else? Yeah, those things I think are the strongest aspects that we talked about, let's say. So yeah, should be something that conveys technology and perhaps something from the future. Okay, so that's another idea for the creative vision here. What else? I think I will also, I'm interpreting here that the idea of something alien and weird was part of the artistic vision here because of all the protruding stuff, you know, because if it's, that does not necessarily help with something being technological. You can think like robots and cars. They don't have like these protruding parts, capsule things, but they still look technological, very high tech, depending on what you look at, which car, which robot you look at. And also I'm considering the lore here for this interpretation, because this gun game came from a different dimension from considering the lore. And so, of that said, I will add that for that idea for my interpretation here of the creative vision, for something alien or weird. So yeah, so a third idea for the interpretation here. Any other one that I would interpret? gun for the engineer on Team Fortress 2, something technological slash futuristic, and something alien slash weird. Is that enough for their what I would describe as the artistic vision of the Pomson? Also I forgot the name Pomson 6000. Also, I also use that when I interpret the idea of something futuristic or technological, because I don't know the specific references, but it sounds like some sort of very high-tech device and stuff. So you can think something like, I don't know, the Xbox 360 perhaps, which is a video game made with technology from the 21st century. So yeah, I don't know. There's probably better examples than the Xbox 360 for something that sounds futuristic and high tech, but I think that's a good enough one, at least for our purposes here. So yeah, but anyway, with all that said, I think that's good enough for me as an interpretation. We could also consider a bit of the game design and stuff. Yeah, but I think that would just add up to what I said before. Because for example, if you look at the game design, this weapon does not use ammo, right? It has infinite ammo. And so we could both tie that to either something very high-tech and technological, or something, at least tie that either to something high-tech technological, or something alien and weird, which creates infinite energy, let's say. That's from a different, that's something, especially alien, right? Something unnatural, unexpected, perhaps. Anyway, so, and there is the other stuff when we talk about the game design of the Pomson, right? It takes away medgun charges and cloak from spies, so this sort of weird properties. Again, I think I tie either to something technological futuristic, so has a very specific property to their shots, either that or something alien from outer space where the physics are different, whatever. So yeah. Anyway, with all that said, also, I just realized, I think that's gonna be a cool one. I think this is also a part of the artistic vision here was also to do a homage to the sci-fi genre. There was the whole update of the space and sci-fi stuff, right? I don't remember the name of the update that launched this weapon, but I think that's kind of the idea. And we can think about. Can I think about an example? Was it Lost in Space? The series that I'm thinking of, with perhaps similar aesthetics. No, I opened up the wrong stuff. In Portuguese, it's Lost in Space. Lost in Space. Yeah. Okay. So the Lost in Space series, sci-fi series, I think has some aesthetics that resemble here the Pomson. And I interpreted that as intentional. It was a homage to that, all of that idea and stuff. Also, some cosmetics of this update has a similar idea to them. If you look at the item set here, Dr. Bart's Brainiac pack. So it has the Rika, the Pomson, the Brainiac hairpiece, and the Brainiac goggles. So in this case specifically the Brainiac hairpiece and the goggles, alongside the goggles, I think tie a reference to scientists in sci-fi movies often. For example, the Doc from Back to the Future, and you could think about Einstein itself, who is not from science fiction, who was a real person in real life, but also was a very important physicist, right? To help our understanding of reality and matter and space. So, in any case, yeah, I think that's gonna be my fourth idea here, side of the artistic vision. so to be a homage to sci-fi movies. Anything else I would add to this interpretation? Which and everything kind of ties together, right? Because if we're gonna make a reference to homage to sci-fi, for it to be technological or futuristic is very easy, or very like work together those ideas. Something alien or weird, perhaps less so, but still is not too far off, right? Because aliens are sometimes a part of sci-fi movies. But anyway. Okay, just anything else I would add to my interpretation here? I don't know, I think that's a good enough interpretation, I believe. So the four ideas sides of it that I'm considering here, interpreting for their creative vision are to make a gun for the engineer for Team Fortress 2, to convey technology and or something from the future, to convey the ideas of something alien or weird, and finally to be a homage to sci-fi movies. So 4 ideas here, 4 sides that I found that I believe are very important for the artistic vision. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the final step of the art critique, the judgment step. So where I'm going to call this successful or unsuccessful art, but to have a base, to base myself, to base my judgment call. Let's talk about the principles of art. Again, those are basically how the elements are used. And when it comes to the principles of art, there is really not a consensus. Every time I research this, there is like everybody disagrees on how many principles there are. Okay, kind of disagree. There are many repeating principles. People agree on many, but disagree on others, and so there is not really. There's not really a consensus, even though we see a lot of stuff being repeated. But some believe there are like 6 principles, some believe there are 14. So some people add the elements when they are talking about the principles. It's a mess. So what I'm going to do here is after my research, funny enough, to me what makes the most sense is what what I read on Wikipedia, plain and simply. And Wikipedia used mostly the ideas of the designer Alex White on his book The Elements of Design, with the addition, and Alex believed in, I think it was 6 principles, mentioned 6 principles in his book. Although one of those, Wikipedia and I am going to switch up. Basically, the principle of movement. For Alex, as last time I checked, he believes hierarchy separate from emphasis, and for the Wikipedia editor, I guess, and I also that makes sense to me. Hierarchy, emphasis, and dominance are all the same principle, and Alex didn't mention the principle of, I think it was movement that he didn't mention, and many other sources consider the principle of movement, and so do I, and so that's kind of the idea. And now that's to say that, so I'm gonna be considering 6 principles of art here, which are movement, unity, emphasis, contrast, balance, and proportion. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about them, because it can be confusing if you are not familiar. So anyway, let's begin. So that's more in depth. So the principles, and once again, there's no order, much like for the elements, but I like to begin with the principle of movement. So, and by the way, that's a cool principle, because it has nothing, it's not related to animations. if this is, because this was rotating, right? But if this is standing, if it's standing still, the principle of movement still applies, which is all about how on a work of art can kind of move your eyes, guide your eyes in some sort of path or direction. There is a thing. The manga Dragon Ball Z from Akira Toriyama is a good example of where you can see the principle of movement in action, because that artist was very skilled at drawing a panel for his comic book manga, where he was skilled at drawing a panel that very naturally moved your eyes to the next panel, and then that panel to the next panel, that panel to the next panel. So very good example of the principle of movement there. And what else? The Impressionists also like to play a bit with trying to convey movement, so you could maybe find a bit of it there. The Impressionists try to convey movement, but so yeah, you perhaps can find a bit of it there also. What I was thinking is that not necessarily conveying movement means there is the principle of movement, I think, but anyway, whatever. Dragon Ball Z is a sure bet. That one, because of the very nature of moving your eyes from panel to panel, that's why it's the example I always use. Anyway, so with that said, do I see the principle of movement here for the Pomson in one way or another? Yeah. Let's see here. Just look at it through different angles. So yeah, okay. For example, where I see a bit of it is on these details on the stock of the gun and on this other part here. I think they move my eyes a bit through the extent of them, and so there's a little bit of it there. I like to always mention, since the principles are how the elements were used, I like to mention when I can the specific elements. In this case, this was accomplished with the elements of forms, right? Considering what we talked about before. And I think also a bit shapes, because of the shape of this part here, I think also helps. What else? That's, I think, perhaps the easiest way I see movement here. Not to say it's the only spot where I see it, but I think it's the easiest one. Also, there's gonna be things like emphasis and contrast, so you gotta watch out for that. Okay, I also just saw another good example of it. Considering this gray kind of lines here, right? They're more like 3D lines, let's say. But anyway, I think they are also contributing a bit to give off the principle of movement, to move our eyes alongside the barrel of this gun to the end of it. It's a bit harder to see those, because there are these capsule things, protrusions in the middle of it, also this set of discs, but I think it's still there. In here it's a bit clearer to see, right? And what else as far as the principle of movement goes? I guess I could also talk about some smaller stuff, but it's so barely noticeable to me that I'm not sure it matters. For example, in the discs, perhaps there's a little bit of it, perhaps, or the capsules, but I don't think it's that clear. At least I wouldn't say so. And also, again, in this case, This case is the farms, right? The shapes, not that much. Mostly the farms. In color, right? Because they are gray, and in contrast with the red part here. Also here the gray in contrast with the red. But the contrast is another principle, right? But it's pretty common for principles of art to influence each other, to be the same part of the artwork to tie to different principles. So don't be surprised. But anyway, yeah, okay. With that said, so let's focus on these parts here for the principle of movement, on the stock and this, what's this anyway, a crest or something. And this part is on the barrel of the gun. I say barrel because I'm not sure if that term applies for this gun, since it's not even hollow in the first place, right? It's terminology for guns, but anyway, so I think it might help us, but still. I'm not taking away the quotation marks. I want to be safe here. So, anyway, okay. So now we have this. That's where I saw the principle of movement being applied here. And remember, so that's how the artist used the elements. So that's what we can say that the artist has done. That's kind of the idea. It was a deliberate choice by the creator. And so what the artist has done, how does that tie to what he envisioned, they envisioned, he or she? The creative vision here. So let's go through the ideas here, the sides of the artistic vision interpreted. By the way, we could just, naturally you could ask the artist what was their vision. And then instead of interpreting, we would just use what they say. But anyway, if you don't know the creator, or if they're deceased already, we resort to interpretation. It's actually the most common thing to do. Anyway, so about that idea of making a gun for the engineer for Team Fortress 2. So is the principle of movement helping with that in some way or another? Well, I see it a little bit, because, okay, a gun for Team Fortress 2, does this help with the idea of Team Fortress 2 specifically, right? Is this sort of line, is this Team Fortress 2 aesthetic? I don't see it, personally. And what about the engineer? Does it tie to the engineer some way, somehow? I also don't see it as tied to the design or the game design of the engineer. But I find it interesting that, especially on the stock of the gun, the barrel, I think we can call this a stock. But anyway, so they kind of follow well the shapes and forms of the parts of the gun, right? So I think it's contributing to make it look like a rifle, to, convey it's a rifle. It has a stock, it has a barrel thing, like, so, and also this thing, although it is not helping with that idea, but anyway. But if the art here is conveying that it's that sort of gun, I think it ties a bit with that idea, right? Because engineers there are rifles on Team Fortress 2, and engineers use shotguns, but I don't see why he can't use a rifle. Indeed, the Rescue Ranger is another rifle he uses. And the Sniper uses rifles, whatever. So it's helping a bit, right? Because it's a gun Team Fortress 2 is a game about guns, it's a shooter game. And it's even a gun that we see often, that we see in the game. So the only thing is it a problem that the engineer has shotguns and usually not rifles? I think I got some XP for some reason. Anyway, so is that a problem? I think it could be, if shotguns were like possibly the most important aspect of the engineer's game design, but I don't believe they are. If anything, I think they tie better to the scout, who uses scatterguns and stuff. The engineer, I think the buildings, obviously the buildings, the range are more strongly tied to the identity, the game design of the class. So if he's not using a shotgun this time, he's using a rifle. I think doesn't is not a problem for the creative vision. At least my take on it. So okay, help me a bit. Okay, with that part of the vision, the principle of movement here. Okay, what about the other stuff? What about being something futuristic or tied to technology? Mm, I think also helping a bit with that, the principle of movement here, especially because of how they have done it, right? With the use of gray in contrast with the red and the forms here, because I think it looks a bit like a circuit board, microelectronics basically, those things. Even if you don't know what a circuit board is, I think the aesthetics are noticeable, and I would guess that's perhaps the idea they try to convey here a bit. There's that possibility. What else? Printed circuit boards, I think is what they call it. What else? What about this part here? Does it tie to that also? No, this part I don't think. I mean, possibly, but I wouldn't be able to tell what kind of technological device has some sort of forms similar to this. There ought to be, but I don't know. Well, at least on this part here, I think it's already ties a bit with that idea, because circuit boards and other stuff is something relatively high technology, right? I mean, for us is run of the mill. For us, it's pretty common. But I think it's technological enough, let's say, for the purposes of conveying the idea. So the principle of movement here is working alongside the creative vision so far on those two parts of it. Cool, right? What about the idea of making something alien and weird? And slash weird. Okay, so now perhaps this I think could work. Because what's the idea here really? Is it like... is it like a conduit for something? How exactly does it work? Is it just to look cool? Maybe? Okay, so... it possibly could be to look cool, but possibly it is serving some sort of function of relaying some sort of energy or something like that, something that wouldn't make exactly sense for our technology. For what I know, an electric current can pass through metal, but is that what it's doing exactly, right? We wouldn't know. So now we have like two options. Either it's just for style and design, or it serves some sort of alien function. And considering that, I think what's important is how it looks. To me, it doesn't look like that stylish, let's say. It doesn't look like the idea of the gun is to be stylish. Perhaps that's another way to think. To me, it does not look like it's trying to be expressive, conveying some sort of message. Okay, we're getting a bit meta here. In game, let's say, in the lore, I wouldn't believe the manufacturer of this gun was trying to convey a message. Even though the artist of the game, Team Fortress 2, tried to convey some message here. So, blah, be careful with that, things can get confusing sometimes. But yeah, anyway, point is, I see a little bit of weirdness in Alien. To me, I think that's what I see the most here. Some sort of weird mechanism that I don't see how it works exactly. Because I personally wouldn't be able to tell its purpose exactly Also, this one is tied to the weird protrusions, which again, what are their purpose? Are they... do they like make an electric arc, which is a thing in real life, by the way? It could be something like that, but when you use this weapon in game, it doesn't happen, you know, considering the context of it. And so... and there's not even something that I would tie to electricity necessarily in the first place. Maybe the... I don't know. The tubes, I think, are not wires. I think they're tubes. I think they're thick, too thick to be wires. So yeah. So that's my take on it. This part here is a bit... I can't conjure its purpose, so I'm gonna call it's working with some sort of alien technology. In this case, literally. And so that's how I see it helping. The principle of movement here. What else? For example, I'm not sure if this would be needed for stability, for example. So anyway. So the last idea for the interpreted vision was to be a homage to sci-fi. And that's kind of easy, considering the previous ideas, right? But I think that's also the case for these weird metal lines here, let's say. On this back part here, I could tie it to some ideas, but I'm not too sure. Perhaps Tron? I guess Tron is sci-fi. Oh, okay. So I guess we could tie this perhaps to the Tron movie series? Tron movies. The aesthetics of those and that idea. I was also thinking that these parts here could be tied to, again, weird alien technology that we sometimes see on sci-fi movies and other medias. So I think the principle of movement is also helping with that, in one way or another. Okay, so let's talk about the different principle now. Let's talk about the principle of unity, which is usually a principle that you can't go wrong with, because the idea of the principle of unity. The principle of unity is all about parts of the artwork apparently working together. And there are many ways to accomplish that. We could think about repetition. That depends on all of this. Depends on how you look at things. But the way I'm considering is that repetition, rhythm, patterns, that kind of stuff can convey that that there's something working together to accomplish something. You can think about continuity. For example, there is some sort of continuity on the use of color here. This part, this little handle thing, is completely red. The color, there's some continuity to how the red was applied. So to me, that conveys that there's some sort of purpose to the whole thing. Basically, delimiting the forms here. Let's say of the handle thing. What else? The proximity is another way to accomplish unity. In this case, like these 6 protrusions being all close to each other, to me communicates that they are working together to do something. I don't know, create an energy ball and shoot at you, something, right? So yeah. All of that would convey unity. And by the way, the opposite of unity is variety. So by this school of thought, let's say, I don't know. So which is neither is good or bad, but it's kind of on the same axis, let's say. So if there is variety here, if there is variety deliberately applied, we can think that the author applied it, and so we can ask the question, how does that help with the creative vision, right? For example, there's some variety on the gauge here. There is this single gauge on this part. There is also variety on this part of the gun here, top part of the gun. Nothing similar to it. Okay, the stock has some similarities, the stock of the gun, but anyway, that's also that's variety and something that we also look at here. But anyway, with that said, for the principles of unity, I see a lot of the forms and the shapes help, and the color gray here working together to convey unity to me, especially with the tubes. The tubes, I think we could say it's mostly about forms rather than shapes, but the tubes and the gray all seem to me to communicate that the mechanism of this weapon is inside this part, let's say, this metal part, and the tubes are channeling, let's say, energy or something through some sort of direction, through some path to accomplish something. So that's a strong source of unity to me, on considering the elements of forms and color. What else? Also, I guess a little bit of value because of how the gray reflects light differently than the gray parts differently than the red parts. So talked a little bit about the material. The red parts are a bit more glass-like, right, or plastic perhaps. The gray appear to be more metallic, so that also communicates a bit of the mechanism. It needs, what if it melts down if it was plastic inside the gun? Who knows? What else for unity? And there's the stuff that I said, right? All the protrusions, the capsule things, to me seem to be that they are working together for some sort of purpose. So again, forms and shapes here. The many discs in repetition. This would be an example of rhythm. I mentioned rhythm, right? And that possibly can sound weird, but rhythm is basically repetitions with slight differences. So it's not a pattern, which needs to be uniform to be a pattern. And so, for example, on this part here that previously I said that it looks like something that shoots lasers or something. It is a series of rings, but they are a bit different in size, right? I think the rings in the middle are a bit bigger than the ones at the edges. And so that's rhythm basically, slight differences, but still some sort of repetition one way or another, right? Anyway, and I would also, there is also some, I see some unity there on the rings, because of that. Also here, on this part, on the hexagonal plate things here, discs. Sorry, hexagonal, pentagonal. They are pentagons, right? What I said before. Yeah. So they have pentagonal shapes, these discs. Anyway, what else for the principle of unity? These two parts here of the stock of the gun, this handle thing here, I don't know. Since they have somewhat similar shapes and forms, I guess, I also see some unity in there, as in they are both working together to, in this case, give you more support when handling the gun, perhaps. What else? Anything else that I would mention? I don't know, I think we gave many good examples here for the principle of unity. So let's see, how does that tie to the creative vision interpreted. So first, to make a weapon for the engineer of TF2, I think I'm gonna say something similar to what I said for movement, honestly. Because of this double stocks thing, the stock of a gun is something that you expect from guns, and so there being some sort of unity here, purpose to help you brace yourself, I think helps a bit convey the idea that this is a rifle, this is a gun, and Team Fortress 2, shooter game, etc, etc. What else? Mostly that, honestly. I was thinking, what about the other part, the barrel of the gun? But I don't think I see Unity that well conveyed there. So mostly because guns have stocks, and so there's this part helping a bit. Again, not helping too much with everything, right? Honestly, it's funny to think that there's the whole red versus blue idea on Team Fortress 2, right? And it's funny to think about how the colors here are red and gray. Oh my god! So does it touch Team Fortress 2? Because there's continuity on the color, I mentioned it, right? And funny enough, like, I think not, because Team Fortress 2 is not just red, it's red and blue, right? So I think it would tie well if the Pomson had a blue alternative, a blue, just in case. I'm pretty sure that's not it, but Pomson, yeah, does not have a style, as they call it. Yeah, Pomson does not have a style, so where is it? So I think it does not tie that well to the game design of Team Fortress 2 for the color. But I think that's interesting to think about. Something they could have done, give different styles for the red team and the blue team for guns like this. But that was not their choice. Anyway, still considering the stock of the guns, I said, the double stock, I don't know. Still helping convey the idea of a rifle when it comes to the principle of unity. So what about the other stuff? What about the idea of something technological or futuristic? Well, easy now, right? Because what I said for the metal parts and the tubes, how at least to me they seem to convey that they're working together to channel energy somewhere, and the metal with the color and the use of value, how it reflects light, all of that seems to communicate the material, and all of that's very easily tied to technology, right? Metal and mechanisms where energy or substances get moved around for some sort of purpose. Very easy, right? Very, very easy. Easily ties to this idea of technology, and especially in technology. If it was something futuristic, maybe futuristic, because if this was something in real life, I'm not sure what purpose would this be, how the mechanism would work exactly. Does it have a reserve of what, plasma, and then it just moves the plasma around? I don't know. It uses apparently pressure or something, right? Because of the gauges, valves, the gauges, indicators. There we go, indicators. I think it's a safer bet for me, because I don't know if I'm pronouncing gauges correctly. So the indicators here, whatever. Okay, all that said, what about the idea? So it helped a bit, right? With technology in the future. What about the idea of something alien and or weird? Well, the protrusions basically. Since there's some unity to the protrusions, as I mentioned, to me they seem like they are working together towards something. The question is towards what? How does this work? I don't know. This is weird. This is from a different dimension if we consider the lore, and so the protrusions here apparently to be working together, conveying that idea. It's tied to that. So working for that creative vision. And finally, what about the homage to sci-fi movies? Is the unity here helping somewhere or another? Well, this kind of thing I think helps a lot, because this is kind of, it's not a Tesla coil, but I think this is a sort of device that we sometimes see in movies and stuff, this sort of design, in sci-fi movies and stuff. Also the discs here, also the indicators are, not sure how much of, yeah, I think some sci-fi movies use those. They're more from the industrial age, right? When we used steam for everything. But anyway, obviously they still use it today, and I think depends on your sci-fi, on what movie. Some movies have like computers and stuff showing everything, so they're not gonna have gouges literally. So I don't know. Well, regardless, I think the designs of this little thing here, it's not an antenna. I don't know what's the name of this. Anyway, the design of it I think ties well to apparels that we've seen on a number of sci-fi movies. Also the set of discs. What else? I'm thinking like the Frankenstein, even though that's what sci-fi horror for its time, I guess. So that I could mention that, but also I'm thinking time travel. Do I remember what sort of movie or series had some sort of time machine involving this? Not sure. Not sure. Oh, either way, I think those are still good enough ties to the aesthetics and other visual aspects of sci-fi, of the sci-fi genre. So I think it's helping with that. Yeah, especially the discs and the rings here with this thing. So okay, so let's move on to another principle of art. Let's now talk about emphasis. Why not? Emphasis slash hierarchy slash dominance, which is about whether or not there is some sort of dominance, some part of the art that is dominant that brings our attention to it, where we focus. If the principle of movement is about guiding, moving your eyes, the principle of emphasis is about keeping them somewhere, let's say. And so, for the emphasis of the Pomson, I think it's mostly on the end of it, on the end of the barrel of the gun, with the protrusions here, because everything else is so chaotic. Let's say there's so many details that to me it's harder to make out an emphatic part of it. It's like all over the place. Too many details all crumpled up together. Remember what I talked about previously for the element of space, how there is so much tightness, everything, so many tight spaces. So yeah, I think that's kind of what's happening here. Except, but on the end of the barrel, I think there's more room, let's say, to see things more clearly, and with the whole radial symmetry thing of the protrusions and stuff. The protrusions themselves, all of that I think conveys emphasis to the end of the barrel. What else? Obviously depends on the angle, because like from this angle you can't even see it, but anyway. I would say it's that. After that, if we're gonna talk about hierarchy, perhaps like all the chaotic stuff in the middle of the gun, and after that the stocks, and the red part here on top. That's how I see the hierarchy there, the emphasis, the focus. So, does that tie some way to make a gun for the engineer 1442? Don't think so. There being emphasis on the end of it is like, okay, that's where the bullets come out of, I guess. In this case, not even bullets, right? We know in game that it's some sort of laser beams or something. But I don't know. Does that tie to even a gun in the first place? It could if it was hollow, but it's not even hollow, so right, it's not a proper barrel, like from this angle, you can see it reflects light, so there is a flat surface here in the middle. So it's not even a proper gun, so which was what I said before the other principles, right? So I don't see it exactly, the emphasis here helping with the conveying that idea of a gun for the engineer for TF2. When I see something like that, I think it's only fair for us to ask then, well, is it being a problem somewhat? Is it possibly conveying a message that's a gun from something from another game, or something that's from maybe TF2 but something different, like something else from the game that could confuse the players, or maybe is it tied to another class? Is it tied to another class? Maybe again something that could confuse players. I don't see any of that. I don't think any class is tied to these protrusions on the most emphatic part here, the end of the barrel. Don't think any other class in the game is tied to that. No other part of the game is tied to that, like the control points or anything, let's say. Don't think that's risk for confusion. And there is the idea that is this tied possibly to another game or something, to the aesthetics of a different game, so maybe we could mix up this weapon for some other game. I don't think so, because, not to say that something like that is not in some other game, but I think the important part is how much it ties to the identity of some other game, you know, to the very defining aesthetics or iconic aspects of some game, and I can't think of any where these protrusion things are an important part of it. You know. So it's all of that to say that this is the principle of emphasis here is kind of neutral when it comes to that part of the creative vision. I think it's not helping, but it's not distracting, let's say, conveying something too different. It's not it's not going against the creative vision, let's say. So of that said, what about the idea of something sci-fi? No, sorry, not something sci-fi. Something technological and or futuristic. Well, in here I don't see it exactly. Because what are these even? Those are not like batteries, so I wouldn't say this is some sort of technological device exactly. It's just something made out of metal and plastic, perhaps, but you know, that's different from something from the future or something that conveys technology. Obviously, you need some degree of technology to produce metal and plastic, but the important part is how much it conveys technology. To me, I don't see it. Although, when I mentioned the hierarchy, the whole set of schmuck and details here in the middle of the gun, I think convey a bit, right? And so, being some hierarchy of areas, of parts of the art here, this one on the middle part of the hierarchy, let's say, I do see it tied to technology because, again, of the valves, of the indicators, the discs, the metal, and stuff, so helping a bit, right? A bit. Okay, what else? What about the idea of something weird, alien stuff? Oh well, now it's easy, right? Because these protrusion things are weird. What are their purpose? Do they like does some sort of electric arc go between them, or do they produce an energy ball between all of them, or do they just do they emanate some sort of wave? Whatever, we don't know, right? So to me, that I see it as something alien or weird that I don't know exactly how the technology works, intuitively speaking. So yeah, I think that's working well with that creative vision, the protrusions and stuff. And finally, what about being a homage to sci-fi movies? Mm, maybe this again. The protrusions I don't see it. Maybe this set of discs of black discs here on this middle part when it comes to emphasis. I don't know. I think it's easier to ask the question of is it going against the sci-fi genre in some way or tied to some other genre, stuff like that. And more strongly perhaps. I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't. I don't wouldn't say so. Would you say this the end of it, the protrusions tied to I don't know action or adventure or? It's a weird question. It doesn't make sense to ask that question, right? But is it perhaps a better question is it being a problem for the artistic vision in any ways? This lack of the emphasis in this way. I think not. Okay, I think it's kind of neutral here. I think the emphasis is just not where it could be when it comes to that idea of sci-fi and stuff. So it's not helping, just not helping. But okay, just not being a problem, but not helping. So okay, let's talk about a different principle of art now. Let's talk about contrast. Contrast is easy even by the name I think. It's how different parts of the artwork are between each other. And so, for example, where do I see contrast here? On the Pomson. Also, I want to go back here real quick. Inspect that. Okay. Let's see. Contrast here. Contrast. Now, since there's so much chaos on the amount of details it has, I think it's mostly on the colors. There is the contrast between the red and gray, just because they're the two most important, most noticeable colors here. And what else? Any other source of contrast that I see? On the shapes and forms, perhaps. Textures, there's not much, right? There's not even points and lines. Value. There's also some contrast on the value because of how light reflects on the metal parts and how it reflects on the red parts, right? Of, I don't know, plastic, acrylic, who knows. So there's some contrast there. But I think it's not that strong of a contrast. To me, it's mostly on the use of color, the element of color here. We can talk about the element of space, but again, I don't see the contrast as being that great between the tight parts with tight space and the parts with more abundant space. I don't see it as that strong of a contrast. It's mostly on the use of color to me, of gray and red. Well, with that said, does that tie to the idea of a gun 1442 in some way or another? Okay, maybe a little bit because of how they have chosen to apply the contrast. Basically because the stock of the gun, the double stock maybe I still don't know of the gun, is red in contrast with this other part that's gray. And so that helps us notice the stock of the gun a bit better. So again, not tying to engineerity for 2's, perhaps sadly, but tying to a gun. So I think it's helping a bit. Like technically there is also I don't think it helps too much with the barrel, just because there's like a bunch of red and gray all over here. So there is red and gray on the protrusions, and there's gray on this part, then red, then gray, then red, then gray, then red. So since it's all alternated, I don't think the contrast is helping too much to convey the barrel of a gun, the contrast of color. As I said before, the principle of movement, for example, I see it helping, but anyway. And but here it's a different story. There is this continuity. Remember the principle of unity? There is this continuity on the color of red around this part, so I think it's more well delimited where the stock of the gun ends and where the other metal part begins. So here I see it helping, so going alongside the creative vision of a gun. And Team Fortress uses guns, so okay, help me with that. Okay, what about the idea of something technological or futuristic? When it comes to the contrast of color, don't think I see the contrast helping with that. No, okay, maybe, no, okay. Maybe on this part, right? The part that we talked about the principle of movement. Since there is not that much contrast here on the middle part of the gun, let's say, with the indicator, the cylinders, the tubes and stuff. So also even on these protrusions, all of that is hard to differentiate. That it's not that easy to differentiate those parts, right? There's not that much contrast. There is some, but I don't know. And all of that would be tied to technology, right? As I said, but it's fine because of the use of color for the printed circuit board, the circuitry idea here of this design. There being the contrast between the gray and the red here, I think it's what does it. So principle of movement and contrast here. Again, well, I did say that to me the strongest contrast is between the red and the gray. So yeah, I was mostly thinking about the middle part against the exterior parts, but yeah, I guess it only makes sense for me to also consider this. And so I guess it is working well for the idea of something technological, right? When it comes to the principle of contrast. Okay, so what about the idea of something weird and from the future, an alien and stuff like that? Okay, a bit of a very specific example, but apparently to me all of the protrusions have like this red and gray parts, so there's some contrast there, right? I did mention the greatest contrast is between the red and gray, and so there being contrast on all of those seems to be a feature of them. I think helps convey the idea. Because it makes them more noticeable, gives them a unique idea. Mostly because I think it makes them easier to notice if there being contrast in each of them. Because they didn't need to, they could be just like completely red or completely gray, and they would still be weird protrusions. But being their contrast present in the design of each of them, I think helps a bit to make them more noticeable. So, and since the protrusions is a very strong source, let's say, of a thing that's weird to me, that looks alien to me, so I guess the contrast is helping with that also. And finally, what about the idea of a homage to sci-fi movies? Is the contrast helping? Well, again, on this part here, because for example of the Tron movies, right? I think evocates a bit of that aesthetic. And mostly it. As far as the contrast goes, the rest is like all over the place. I don't know if there's some other sci-fi story with this sort of thing. But anyway, yeah, because of Tron, so I guess it ties to a little bit to the sci-fi genre. And okay, so that's it for the principle of contrast. Let's talk about now the principle of balance. Why not? Balance is all about there being some sort. Also, let's reset the presentation. Balance is about being some sort of equilibrium, state of equilibrium or tension that we can kind of make out, and how even or uneven that state is. Is the thing gonna rip apart? Is it gonna fall down? So that's it. You can think about visual weight, as we say. So, and what's my take here on the principle of balance for the Pomson? It seems to be mostly balanced, right? The protrusions, I think, add a little bit of unbalance because they are, you know, they are protrusions. They are straying away from the center of mass of the object. But the thing is, they don't go that far. So, and they're somewhat thick. So they're not. I don't think they are making this unbalanced in some way. Also, I don't think I see any sort of tension somewhere, tension part. The whole design of this weapon looks, I don't know if it is, but to me it looks balanced in general. The engineer could tell us if this is balanced, right? If the weapon, what if the very end of the weapon has a core of very dense lead or something, then the engineer, then it falls. But visually, for the visual weight, I believe it's balanced. Also, probably that's not the case with the lead, right? Because it would be very hard to use. But anyway, yeah. So mostly balanced. The very tiny possibility of unbalance is on the protrusions, but they are not. They don't go that far, right? So mostly balanced. And okay, so does that tie to the creative vision interpreted? Does the principle of balance here help with conveying the idea of a apple for the engineer for the shoe? As I say often, like, there are many assets from Team Fortress 2 with balanced aesthetics, but I just don't see that as an iconic feature of Team Fortress 2. I think a lot of the shapes would perhaps be an iconic part of Team Fortress 2. And other stuff like the use of color, but the conveying the principle of balance, I don't think that's a thing. Even though it's common, I just don't see it as a part of the identity of Team Fortress 2. So the strongest part of the identity, let's say. So anyway, but at the same time, again, is it tied to some other game in some way or another, to the aesthetics of some other game? I don't think anything that strongly. I don't think you look at this and think, oh, this art style, this gun must be from XYZ game. At least when it comes to the balance, I don't see any of that. So, yeah. So kind of neutral when it comes to the principle of balance. What about the idea of and you could say that guns are balanced, I guess, but a lot of things are balanced, so I don't think the balance ties too well with guns. I did mention the ideas of the stock because that's this very specific shape and form that you don't see on, that's typical for guns, right? Rifles. You don't see it always on other designs, but simply being balanced, I don't see it. It's being something specific for guns. So anyway. Okay, what about the idea of something technological and tied to the future, perhaps? When it comes to the balance, also don't see us helping with that. But does it perhaps tie to something from the past or something rudimentary, something not that technological? Again, for balance, no, I don't see that's tied to the principle of balance here, being balanced. The thing is, if it's important to notice where or how the thing is balanced or unbalanced, because if here it's just the protrusions that's very slight source of unbalance, right? If this thing was it's balanced on this part and unbalanced on that one and so on and so forth, so then it would be more interesting for us. Then it would we could talk a little bit more of the principle of balance. So, but since that's not the case, that's why things are a bit muddled up right now. But that's fine. Again, so it's not helping, but not going against the principle of, the idea of technology and future. What about the idea of something weird and alien? Well, okay, so now it's a bit of what I mean. Since it's mostly balance, but the small source of imbalance that there is on the protrusions, basically, since that's tied to something alien, right? So I guess it's helping, because it's notable, right? If it's a difference from the norm, so it's kind of working well for that idea, I would say. Especially like most protrusions, but what about this part here? On this part here, it's not helping at all with the principle of balance, right? It's kind of a protrusion, but it's not helping with the bring unbalance to the gun, but the other ones are, so that's kind of the idea here. I just realized that there is this one who is not helping with balance, but the other ones are, most of them anyway. So yeah, so at the end, like helping a little bit with that idea of conveying something weird or alien, as I see it. And finally, what about the idea of a homage to sci-fi movies? I don't see it. Once again, like balance, I don't think it's something that's iconic for sci-fi movies. There's some things that are balanced, some things that are not balanced. Just no, that's not the deal here. But what about could it be tied to some other genre? The balance here and the small source of imbalance and stuff. Nah, not really, right? A lot of things are balanced, many things are unbalanced also. It's about, the important part here were to see sources of balance or unbalance, right? Parts of the artwork where we see the balance or unbalance. And basically the protrusions. So anyway, mostly neutral, right, when it comes to balance. Just the protrusions help a bit of the idea of something alien. And finally, what about the last principle of the 6 that I mentioned is the principle of proportion. The principle of proportion is all about the sizes of objects, of different parts of the artwork, and how even or uneven they are. So that's the idea of the principle of proportion, or scale, another name for it. So, and what's my take here on the principle of proportion? How is it being accomplished? Well, there are many of these little details, like the protrusions, but not only those. There is also this set of discs where I would say have similar proportions. This thing here with the rings. It's not an antenna. I just don't know what it is. Could it be an antenna? I don't know. Anyway, so the protrusions plus the discs and rings, I see all of those as having a shared proportion here. Also, the indicators are not too far off from them, especially the bigger ones, right? This and this. What else? Also, the different parts of the gun have different proportion to them. So basically, the stock, the two stocks, this part over here on top, they have a bigger proportion. In comparison to the other stuff I talked about, proportion. Also, I guess here the barrel of the gun has a proportion to the other. So, and finally, I think that's mostly it. So, and I could also talk about the metal part, which is the indicators, discs, rings, and protrusions, some of them. I think that also, I think that's the thing with the biggest proportion here. And yeah, so we have like 3 levels here, right? The smallest proportions are the details, protrusions, discs, rings thing, and indicators, all that stuff. On the middle ground, we have the different parts of the gun, the stock, the barrel, and the other red parts. And the one with the biggest proportion is the rest, basically I don't know the name of it, the body, let's call it, of the gun, with the gray part that houses the other details. So that's how I see the proportions here. And does any of that tie to the idea of Apple for the engineer 1442? I guess like the middle proportion, let's say, right, of the different parts of the gun, the stock, the barrel, the other stock, and this thing here at the top, they're being they sharing proportions, and there being like a specific scale, a specific proportion for them. I think help a bit convey the ideas of a gun again. So, although this part on the top part here does not help, right? But the other parts do, so I think it's mostly helping with that. A bit. Although again, not tied to Team 42, not tied to the engineer, just to the idea of a gun. And what else? But helping a little bit still. What about the idea of making something technological and futuristic? So, I guess, okay, yeah, it's kind of a rough one here. Because things like the indicators, the discs, the rings, the tubes, all of that I think are kind of futuristic, but they share proportion with the protrusions, which is, again, I don't see I don't see them conveying technology. They apparently technology is needed for you to make those, but I don't see them conveying technology. So it's kind of muddled up, right? And so that's where I could see it. The other idea was perhaps the part of the biggest proportion, right? The body of the gun, which houses everything. But that's not something tied to be future specifically, because it's just a metal part thing without the indicators and tubes and stuff. I guess I could tie it to technology, just not like high technology. Okay, I did say just technological. I did say futuristic or technological. So, well, since I just said technological, I didn't say high technology, or did I? Oh, I don't know. If I said just technological, I guess the metal housing of the gun, let's say, that's probably the wrong term, but whatever. I guess it could tie to that, but not to futurism, right? Just because, because you need the technology to make like these metal parts things and stuff. And this time, since it's the whole, unlike the protrusions, since it's more of a complex design, let's say, the whole geometry of this stuff. I could tie it a bit to technology, I guess. To me, that's the difference between that and the protrusions, because the protrusions is like some sort of somewhat simple form, right? It's basically a thumb, so I don't know. But to make stuff like this part here, and also with the whole specific shapes and forms of it, right? So I guess I tie it a bit to technology, not to something from the future, but to technology. And the other stuff that I said, the indicators, the discs, the rings are modeled up with the protrusions, so I wouldn't tie to that. But anyway. Moving on, what about the idea of weirdness in Alien? Again, the main source of that is on the protrusions, right? And as I said, they are kind of modeled up with the discs, rings, and indicators, which I don't see as something alien at all. So maybe the rings, but even then. Yeah, like kind of modeled up, so I don't see it as helping. Okay, and also I should ask: are the proportions tying to something else, jarringly? That's not something alien or weird. That's not something future or technological, right? For the proportions here, I don't think anything like that's going on. It would be very hard in the first place, right? How would you pull that off? It would have to be something like, oh, what if there is I don't know, a bonfire somewhere here, right? It would be okay as long as it didn't have like big proportions, you know, like if there was like a little drawing of a bonfire somewhere and that tied to the lore, I don't think it would go too much against, depending on the proportion of it. So yeah, and I don't think, I don't think the proportions are going against the creative vision here in any way. When it comes to something technological from the future and or the other idea of something weird and alien. And so, and finally the last idea, what about the homage to sci-fi? Similar problem for what I said for something from the future. The indicators, and especially in the case of sci-fi genre, the discs and rings, they're kind of modeled up with the protrusions. I wouldn't say this is sci-fi. And even the indicators are, again, depends on your sci-fi movie, depends a lot. So yeah, so not helping that much. And so that was the principle of what was it? Proportion. Okay, so that's all 6 principles. And I can finally pass judgment. Is this a successful work of art or not? Well, for the most part, many of the principles were tied one way or another to the ideas for the creative vision, right? Some helped less than others. For example, proportion didn't help that well, and balance didn't tie too well, right? But for the other ones, movement I think helped a lot. Unity is how it often helps a lot with creative visions. And the contrast of the red and gray and the emphasis on the protrusions, all of that I think helped in many ways with the creative vision. So my judgment here is that this is a successful work of art. Congratulations, creators of the Pomson 6000. As I said, I think stuff like the principle of emphasis and unity and contrast, making us look at the stock of the gun mostly, helps us realize it's a gun. Also, the protrusions and the principle of emphasis help us look at it as something weird and alien, and a little bit of the balance, right? Also, the contrast and movement helps a bit for us to think of it as sci-fi, as futuristic, and sci-fi, right? And yeah, and everything else that I said also. In general, yeah, that's it. In general, things are working together for the vision. So successful work of art. So that was it for today. Join me tomorrow on stream for more gameplay and art critique of video game stuff. Let's say. So see you then. Bye.